we're throwing you in the deep end. Greg was just telling a thrilling story about waking up in the middle of an operation, which is one of my greatest fears. So, sorry, everyone, we've got legend, absolute legend of the game, Greg Nuckols on the show. And we're going to ask him about fitness. We're going to ask him about growing muscles and all kinds of shit about getting stronger. But he was just sort of recounting his tale of getting his appendix out, which was largely uncomplicated, but then being put under for wisdom teeth was a completely different story. Please continue.
Yeah. So Gus was saying one of his fears was waking up during surgery or being aware of it. And when I got my appendix out, it was it ended up being like literally nothing. Like I was back to my day-to-day life literally within, like, as soon as I became lucid after the procedure. Like just Tylenol and ibuprofen.
Did you wake up hungover from the knockout gas and stuff like that? Because even me, when I woke up from wisdom teeth, I was like, whoa, it felt like sort of almost being revived.
No, I felt like I just had a good night of sleep. Honestly, like it was
refreshed.
It was incredible. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, that was a total nothing burger. But I was very nervous about it and was just nervous about having any type of surgery. Because I had my wisdom teeth removed when I was younger, and whatever drugs they gave me to put me under, I was still like fully conscious. Like I was paralyzed. I couldn't talk.
No, that's worse.
But I was
that's
fully,
even worse.
I was fully lucid and aware and could feel it. Like it was intensely unpleasant. So yeah, then when they were bringing me in for an appendectomy, the surgeon and the anesthesiologist asked if I had any concerns, and I said, in fact, I do. I had this experience getting my wisdom teeth out, and the anesthesiologist just kind of chuckles. He's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And I was like,
what, he's like the Undertaker? He's like, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, no, I was like, how can you be so confident?
Yeah, you'll never wake up again.
Well, no, he said that, and like, you know, I'm not a doctor or a pharmacist or an anesthesiologist or anything like that. Like, I don't know the different classes of sedatives they might give people. But he said basically the sedatives they give you for, like less invasive operations are kind of like, I don't know, like they paralyze you and like kind of sedate you, but they're like primarily like anterograde amnesiacs. Like you're less lucid than you would otherwise be, but basically like whatever you experience, you shouldn't be forming memories of it. And apparently I was just like more lucid than I should have been. And like, I fucking remembered it. So, he was like, yeah, but the stuff that they give you for like invasive procedures, just no awareness of anything.
Okay, and I was like, induced coma almost, like closer to.
Yeah, and also I was like, honestly, of the two, like between wisdom teeth removal and appendectomy, like, you know, the appendix was bad, so I was like, it's got to get out no matter what, and also, when you think about it, like I knew it was just going to be a little laparoscopic surgery. And so I was like, even if I'm lucid and even if I feel it, it's not going to be as bad as the wisdom teeth. Like you have a lot of nerves in your mouth. And I was like, push comes to shove. Like I'm just going to get basically 3 small stab wounds in my abdomen. And like, yeah, it's going to hurt, but it's not going to hurt like someone digging teeth out of your fucking jaw. So I was like, okay, well, I didn't really believe him, but I was like, whatever happens here, if it's unpleasant, it won't be as bad as the wisdom teeth. So, whatever. Like it is what it is. But no, like the guy assisting the anesthesiologist, like I had an IV in, and he's like, all right, I'm gonna give you a shot, or like I'm gonna, you know, put some drugs in here. It'll feel like you've maybe taken like 2 or 3 shots. You're gonna feel a little loopy, and then 30 seconds later, you're going to wake up and not remember a thing. And I was like, all right, we'll see. So he put the drugs in, started feeling a little loopy. I'm like, all right. And then the next thing I knew, I was waking up and talking about street prices of drugs with the nurse who was giving me medication, because they said, like, try to manage the pain as well as you can with like extra strength ibuprofen and Tylenol, but we're also going to give you some Percocets, and like just use that if you absolutely need to. And like,
don't go full Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, well, I don't enjoy Percocets. Like, the thing is, morphine is sick. I've had morphine a few times, not recreationally, also like hospital related stuff. Morphine is sick. I fuck with morphine. I understand why people get addicted to opiates, but like Vicodin, Percocets, nah, like they're trash. Like they, at least for me, just kind of make me. No, like they are, but like there's a difference between like popping a few pills and like mainlining heroin. Like it's
yeah. But
a different experience.
It's something that always confuses me, classes of drugs, and then there is so much variance in sort of response or from it. I struggled around my head around it all. Like even with when people say that steroids, like it's like so many of them just like boost your tests. I'm like, yeah, but like I guess it's like esters and timings. Yeah. But
yeah, so like they gave me like 5 milligram Percocets, and they said, we're giving you Percocets, try not to take these. I was like, you have nothing to worry about. I've had Percocets, don't like them. It'll be fine. I'm not going to get hooked. I'm not going to become another statistic of the opioid epidemic.
Out about that now.
Yeah. And I was like, how much are they? And it was like, Perc 5. So I was like, never mind. Not even useful. Like, people who use Percocets recreationally, like they're going for at least Perc 30s. So I was like, yeah, this is trash. Like I have no use for this whatsoever.
Right. So that's like the Dr. House Percocet.
Yeah. So that was the first, that was the guy said, you're going to feel a little woozy. And then the next thing I know, I'm just like discussing whether or not I could sell the pain medication they're prescribing on the street. Not that I had any intention to, but just, like if everything in my life starts going downhill, it's nice to know that I have a backup plan. But unfortunately, the Percocets they prescribed do not enable that backup plan,
Too low a street value.
Do what?
It's too low straight value to replace the macro factor money.
Just anyone who has an opioid habit, like Perc 5s are nothing. Like that's...
Is it the dosage that's really low?
Yeah. If you want to learn more about the general physical preparation training philosophy, we put together an extremely practical course covering all the different aspects of physical preparation, as well as a unit on programming, so you know how to tie it all together and produce the same world-class results that we get with our athletes. We've got pre-recorded lectures, a community page where you can ask questions and interact with the other GPP coaches, as well as monthly calls where you can ask questions live or just catch up and hang out with us. Check out the link in the show notes for more info. Anyway, back to the show. Amateur shit. Thank you for recounting those stories. That was really, really interesting and not the path I expected to take at the start of this podcast. But welcome back to the show, Greg Nuckols. I remember when you came on, it was like in the first 50 episodes, and I was like, I just cannot believe we've snagged a guest like Greg Nuckols so early. But I think enough time has passed in the fitness industry, and behind the scenes isn't the right word for it, but I just feel like now there's almost like a generation gap emerging in the fitness industry where I actually talk to coaches who don't know who Greg Nuckols is. And I'm like, oh my God, Greg Nuckols was my evidence-based fucking go. Yeah, congratulations for getting yourself out of the public eye, but we all fucking miss you. But just for the unawares, can you sort of just tell us a little bit about the Greg Nuckols story? Because I think a lot of people, if they checked you out now, they'd be like, who's this evidence-based nerd pushing pencils and crunching all these numbers? Does he even lift? But you are quite the fucking lifter. So can you just tell us a little bit of your backstory, getting into lifting and then transitioning into more the academic side of things and educating?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that is the response I want people to have. My dream is for everyone to forget that I exist. That's what I'm angling for. This is the first podcast I've done. This is the first podcast I've done, period, in a long time. Like we even stopped doing the Stronger by Science podcast.
Wow.
But I just enjoyed shooting the shit with you guys last time. So here I am.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
But yeah, I was a power lifter back in the day. Bullet points, played sports, got too many concussions, got too many injuries. A coach at my gym who turned out to be a very good power lifter, Travis Mash, mostly known for weightlifting now, but I always forget that
Travis Mash was your coach.
Yeah, he pulled me aside and he was like, "Yeah, I'm sure you're a fine athlete, but I think you're better at lifting weights than playing real sports. And there's a sport called powerlifting, and if you sustain head trauma doing that, you did something very wrong. So why don't you give it a shot?" So I did and enjoyed it and got reasonably good at it for a while, transitioned to coaching, became more and more of a nerd over time, started writing about science, went back to school.
You are such a humble cunt. How are you glossing over setting a world record?
Well, people are a lot stronger now. You're right. But for fuck's sake,
what did you squat? 110 kilos. What was the record at the time? It wasn't nothing.
340 and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was a big number in 2015. It's not like there's people at 73 doing that. So,
dude, strength inflation is actually fucked. I feel like every drug tested 17-year-old has a 700-pound deadlift. And I remember it was top of Reddit powerlifting when Larry Wheels deadlifted 700. And now it's just like fucking crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. Like the sport has come a long way, both tested and untested. I mean, we're mere days removed from Engelbrecht. Hitting 1200 at 120.
Someone please check in on the mental health of all 120 kilo lifters.
No. The 120 kilo lifters, I guarantee you, are fine. They're like, there's a guy in our class, he's a fucking freak. It's the super heavies that you need to check in on because, the super heavy class is supposed to exist for a reason. Like, you don't have to worry about your weight, you don't have to cut, but you lift the heaviest weights. When a guy, depending on the Fed you compete in, 2 or 3 weight classes below that is outlifting you, that's a problem. God, he's a monster. It's incredible.
And he just looks like he's doing what he's meant to be doing. Like, I don't know how else to describe it, but yeah, it blows my fucking mind. I want to sort of touch on this because this is a topic that has come up quite a bit in the, it's not evidence-based, what is it? Science-based lifting community, where they're very big on this idea that if you're getting stronger, you're growing muscle. And like,
yes, I was gonna ask
and this is something that like, I believe that getting stronger probably builds muscle. But I also know that, and this is something I'm increasingly confused by. And maybe you can help me work through what's the difference between good bodybuilding training and good powerlifting training when you remove the focus on SBD. Like, because I guess that's probably my current understanding of it, that so you've got people trying to be strong and there's just 3 lifts where they put most of their emphasis. And the difference between then the people that are trying to grow the most muscle is they just apply those principles to more different parts of their body and less of an emphasis on 1RM strength.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, where would you start unpacking that as far as like what you might be missing? But then also like why that could be a completely valid approach. I can also keep going because where this has been a central shift in my focus is I'm trying to bring my arms up. And I've always sort of had this thing of like, don't be an ego lifter. Like I see guys with big pipes and they're curling like the 10 kilo dumbbells. And I don't want to be there like a tosser with 12-inch arms curling the 20s. So I'd be like, all right, just take the fucking science-based guy's word for it. If I progress my fucking hammer curls to the point where I can do 20 kilo dumbbells for sets of 8 with a rep in reserve and get my body weight going up, surely that's going to lead to some big pipes. Or is there something else to it? What do you think?
No, I think that's more correct than incorrect. I think that when you look at the physiques of top powerlifters and compare them to the physiques of top bodybuilders, I think most of the visual differences just come down to like, what are people focusing on in their training? And quite frankly, like, what do you have ideal genetics for? Because like the optimal powerlifter physique is not one that would look the best on stage, even if you cut down. Like you'd be very muscular, but based on the way you train, your physique probably wouldn't be very like flowy or balanced. But then also just like the bone structure that is conducive to being a good powerlifter is not really. It's not going to give you that like extreme like tapered V physique. Like if someone walked through the door of the gym and said, "Hey, I'm interested in being a powerlifter. Do you think I have a decent chance of being any good at it?" I'm not going to be able to predict that all that well. But B, if I were to try to predict it, the two things I'd look at are basically just like, do you have large joints? Like do you have like big wrists, big elbows, big ankles? Like, do you look like someone who has a hefty frame that can withstand a lot of load and can put a ton of muscle on it? And two, do you have wide hips and a big ass, like independent of training? And the thing is, like, that's
just coming in naturally, like just without any prior experience.
Wellness physique.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what you're looking for. Because if you can put on more lower body muscle, like it's going to be clutch for your squat, it's going to be clutch for your deadlift. If you have wide hips, that's probably going to enable you to pull sumo, which like I think on average, sumo and conventional for most people most of the time, like, or not for most people most of the time, but like on average tend to lead to similar relative numbers. But like if you have a hip structure that's like super conducive to sumo deadlifting, I think that probably gives you a slightly higher ceiling than someone who's maybe a little bit narrower and more just like conventionally built for the conventional deadlift. So yeah, like I'm looking for someone who just has like a huge ass, and no matter how jacked they get, they're never going to have like that extremely tapered of a bodybuilding physique. You know what I mean? So I think that's part of it. And then, the other big part is just kind of like what you focus on in your training. But I mean, ultimately, powerlifters are powerlifters are more muscular than I think bodybuilding fans realize. And I think bodybuilders are stronger than powerlifting fans realize. And I think the degree to which powerlifters tend to be stronger than bodybuilders is mostly just down to like specific skill of the lifts you practice. This is an anecdote. This doesn't constitute evidence, although if people are interested, there is research like more or less bearing this out. Just kind of like comparing muscularity versus strength in powerlifters and bodybuilders.
What level were they at?
Do what?
Were these high level bodybuilders and powerlifters? Because because I feel like when I look at high level bodybuilders and powerlifters, I see what you're saying. But in my personal experience, which like we said is not the best form of evidence, I just see so many weak guys who are way bigger than me. And I'm like, what the fuck is doing? Like, is that just variance?
This is what I'm getting at, basically. So, well, okay. Two things. One is if you take, say, a powerlifter who squats 350. You guys mostly do kilos, right?
Yeah. For the audience, probably better. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you take a powerlifter who squats 350 and a bodybuilder who's like reasonably strong, but would not stand out at a powerlifting meet. Maybe squats 200, like pretty strong guy, pretty jacked, but way, way lower squat. If you put the two of those guys on a leg press and have them do a 1RM, it'll probably be a lot more similar than the squat numbers would suggest. And if you abstracted that even further and took them into a lab and just tested like maximum knee extension strength on an isometric dynamometer, if their muscles are roughly the same size, you'll probably get a roughly similar number out on the other end.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the anecdote I was going to give is when I was in college, that's when I was approaching the best that I ever was at powerlifting. And there was this guy who trained at the same gym named Casey, who was kind of more on the bodybuilding side of things. And we didn't work out together. Like, we were always in the gym at the same time, but we weren't like training partners because our training styles were very different. But we're both courteous guys. So anytime we wanted to use the same piece of equipment, we would work in with each other. And anytime we were both squatting together, like, he was doing reps with like 350 or like 150-ish. And then when it was my time to squat, I'd be like, similar number of reps, but like, let's slap 2 or 3 more plates on the bar. But then if we found ourselves vying for the leg press at the same time, or a row machine at the same time, or, if we're doing skull crushers at the same time or whatever, he was more muscular than me and he used more weight than me on every single lift that wasn't squat, bench, or deadlift.
So it's that skill acquisition. That's it.
Yeah, just like in general, he was a stronger guy, but I was way better at him at precisely 3 things. And so one, a lot of the strength you see from powerlifters is just like a highly refined degree of motor skill in precisely 3 things that we put all of our time and effort into. The other thing, and like this is something that I think is very underappreciated, is just that like there is considerable inter-individual variability in terms of like how strong people's muscles are just per unit of muscle size. And it's not entirely clear why that is. Like one hypothesis is that it's due to just like varying degrees of like myofibrillar density, like of the volume of muscle size you have, how much of it is just comprised of contractile proteins. But that doesn't seem to fully explain it, because variability. So, okay, there's a measurable quantity called specific force, which is just how much force something can produce per unit of, in the case of whole muscle, physiological cross-sectional area. So that like accounts for the degree to which fibers are aligned with the muscle's overall line of pull. And in the case of individual fibers, just contractile force divided by fiber contractile area. And we see way more variability in whole muscle specific force than in single fiber specific force. So like for individual fibers, you see, oh God, I forget the exact units, but I think you can scale it up and down accordingly. I think it's something like 20 newtons of force per square centimeter of cross-sectional area. And that's kind of like the standard deviation there is kind of like plus or minus 4 or 5 or so. So like most individual fibers, like don't worry about units, like average is 20 and the typical range is kind of like 15 to 25. Like it's pretty tight.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. But for entire muscles, there was a review paper that came out that just characterized not even like within each study the variability, but just like within the published research, the variability of averages of muscle specific forces that have been published. And it's anywhere from like 2 to 73. And like
deviation.
So like the analysis they did, they weighted it based on like methodological rigor of the studies, because like it varies. Like there are various things that like you probably should control, but not all research groups do. But like the median and the interquartile range for that, I think if memory serves, ended up being something like 26 with a range from like 12 to 40-ish. So like roughly twice, approximately 2 to 2.5 times as much variability in whole muscle specific force as single fiber specific force. And you see that when comparing kind of across studies and also within studies as well. So there haven't been a ton of papers that have measured muscle specific force and fiber specific force in the same population with kind of like the highest quality methods. But the ones that do, like, invariably find that whole muscle specific force varies more than fiber specific force does. And that already accounts. So like, the way you measure muscle specific force is you're estimating like linear contractile force at the tendon. So it's not just joint moment. So it already accounts for differences in like how advantageous your origin and insertion points are for creating joint moments. So like, and that's like a whole other thing. Like strength athletes probably do, I would guess, have more favorable insertions, but measures of whole muscle force already account for that. Like that's
just do we know what that looks like? So more favorable insertions. Is that a specific example, or is it just
like
there's variance, and obviously some of them are better or worse? But yeah, is there something where we've identified?
Yeah. I mean, we know exactly what it would be. Like you want all of your muscles to attach as far from joints as possible if you want to be as strong as possible.
It's just crazy leverage. So someone like Austin Perkins, but then again, it's so hard because it's hard to identify. It's like there could be technical aspects of his squat and stuff that we're not seeing.
Yeah. But before I get too far afield, basically, even when accounting for variation in like how favorable origins and insertions are, there is just like quite a bit of variability in how strong people's muscles are per unit of cross-sectional area, even independent of how strong their fibers are per unit of cross-sectional area. And the leading hypothesis to explain that is that it has to do with like the efficiency of force transfer to the connective tissue matrix surrounding each muscle fiber. So like when muscles contract, you pull one end towards the other. And that's cool and all, but your muscles don't just exist as fibers floating in a vacuum. Like ultimately that force needs to make it to your tendons. And really cool thing about the musculoskeletal system is like, there's just a big mesh of collagen that encircles the whole thing. So like people talk about like, well, like slightly more than that. So like people talk about like muscles and tendons and bones as if they're separate things, and they are. Like you can kind of draw a line between them. Like when you get down to the tendon, there's no fibers anymore, like no muscle fibers anymore, and like there's no bone yet. But basically all of those tissues are like directly kind of stitched together. So you have your endomysium that surrounds each muscle fiber. You have your perimysium that surrounds each fascicle of muscle fibers. And then you have your perimysium that surrounds like the entire muscle. And so all of those things
on shapes.
Yeah. And all of those things are interlinked. And then what your tendon is basically just those. Like it is your fascia kind of coming together at the point where the muscle fibers stop. And now you have a tendon. And then like it doesn't just kind of like, I don't know, it's not like a magnet that's like stuck to your bone. Like your bone is also by mass, like, I shouldn't put an exact number on it. But I think if memory serves, your bones by mass are like 40% collagen as well. Like if this is a fun little experiment.
So what's the rest? Is the rest keratin? Am I being stupid?
No, the rest is just like the minerals, like the calcium based minerals.
So it's everything is just so much collagen.
Yeah, like the calcium phosphate based mineral crystals, basically. But yeah, like all of those just have collagen surrounding them. So like a fun little experiment that someone could do is if you like bake a bone at like a really high temperature for a long time to like a degree that would like burn away all of the collagen, the bone still looks like the bone, but it gets like really, really brittle. Like you can shatter it very easily. But then if you instead take that same bone and bathe it in a solution that like dissolves the calcium phosphate, you're left with something that still looks just like the bone, but it's just the collagen from the bone. And it's just like a wobbly bone, basically.
Oh, wow.
Like it's not rigid at all. But yeah, so like the collagen from the tendon is directly continuous with the collagen in the bone. Like it's fully interlinked. Which I think is very cool. Like you could completely dissolve someone's muscles and bones and be left with like essentially you'd be essentially left with like a collagen skeleton that would be the exact same shape as all of that. I just think that's very cool. But yeah, so like for force to get transmitted to the bone, it has to be transferred into that collagen matrix, which becomes the tendon, which then pulls on the bone. And so essentially like the more kind of linkages you have between muscle fibers and the like collagen sheaths surrounding them, the more efficient that force transfer should be. And that's probably not the only factor contributing to variations in whole muscle specific force, but that's currently believed to be the primary factor determining it. So basically, like one would predict that people who end up excelling at strength sports, independent of anything else, are probably people whose like the connective tissue properties of their muscles, independent of how much force their fibers can generate in isolation, like those connective tissue properties just allow for more like effective and efficient force transfer to the tendon.
Is that breaking it down all the way to like mastering the skill when you take it all the way to the practical side inside the gym? Is that what that means, or is that something different?
That's something different as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is just purely just like straight up zero skill type strength. Like,
I think that was the thing that was confusing me, because when everyone was like, "No, it's just like, you know, if you get stronger, you're gonna get bigger muscles." And then again, I hate to always use Austin Perkins as my example. I was like, "There's not that much skill in it." Like, and that's not me making some snobby comment
for
about skill in powerlifting. I respect the skill of lifting, but I was like, man, like, how could he be that much better? And again, maybe I do need to open myself up more to the degree of variance of skill expression, even in elite powerlifters. But then with all those other things going on beneath the surface, like insertions, tendon qualities, just overall tissue qualities, it seems like there's a lot more potential explanation to draw from.
Yeah.
So that's completely removed from skill acquisition, and that's just raw strength no matter what it is. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Like if again, like you just put someone on like a dynamometer and just tested pure isometric strength, even if you like use like an electrically evoked contraction, like you stimulated their motor nerve to like ensure full activation, like nothing about like, oh, can they like voluntarily activate the muscle or not? If you account for all of that, some people still just have muscles that are kind of like tuned to produce more force than other people's.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The downside of that is there is like a reduction in contraction velocity. Like that's kind of like the flip side of it. And it's the same with like the concept of like favorable tendon insertions is opposite for strength versus speed athletes. Like if you wanted to be the best sprinter possible,
long Achilles.
Well, not just like the length of the Achilles, but like, okay, so think about like there's a bolt and you have a wrench and it's wedged and you're trying to create torque to turn that bolt. Would you grab, like, let's say this is the bolt, this is the wrench. Would you grab it close to the bolt, or would you grab the wrench as far from as far as possible?
Yeah.
So that is the concept of like favorable tendon insertions for strength. Like the further a tendon inserts from a joint, the better it is. So like if you think about your biceps, if your biceps are inserting very, very close to your elbow, that's like gripping it very close to the bolt. The further down your forearm your biceps insert, that's like gripping it further and further from the bolt and getting more and more leverage. And
so
like
it's aesthetically better and functionally better, you're telling me.
No,
I think it's,
I mean,
because those people wouldn't have as much gap there, right? Wouldn't they have more of that fullness if it's connecting?
Well, the closer to the elbow it inserts, the skinnier your elbow is going to look, and so like the more impressive your bicep will look as a result.
So it's better. It looks fuller. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, and you know, we're not talking about like a threefold difference as it would be when you're grabbing a wrench. Like we're talking about a difference of like a centimeter or something, but that's the basic concept. But then going back to that wrench, if this is the bolt, if and let's say now your hand is attached to a muscle or you're like pulling on a cord or something to twist it. If you pull this cord down an inch here, maybe you get like 15 degrees of rotation. If you pull it down an inch out here, you maybe get like 3 degrees of rotation.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you're interested in maximizing the rotational velocity that you can generate at a joint, aka how much speed you can produce, you want the least favorable insertions for strength possible. Like for each unit of linear muscle contraction, the closer a muscle inserts to a joint, the more like joint rotation that will create.
So less energy that's being used almost.
I think energy usage, I think that mostly has to do with like elastic properties of the tendons. That's
better leverage for sure.
You know what? Maybe it is more energy efficient. I'm not sure. I would need to think through that a little bit. Basically, it does require more linear contractile force of the muscle to create a particular joint moment, but the maximum like rotational speed you can achieve at that joint is higher. The less favorable your insertions are for strength.
You do see that just some absolute weak dogs. They're not that weak. And again, they're relatively strong when you compare them to non-lifters. But yeah, you do just see so much of it. But then, and obviously, Jen's
that's that genetics.
The stuff that you can't see, then the highly visible stuff, I guess, on top of that, like the unfavorable limb lengths for those runners. Actually, to be fair, there's some absolute power chodes in sprinting at the moment.
Yeah.
But obviously, it affects
and with runners, not so much sprinters, but distance runners, the reason that really long Achilles tendon is beneficial, part of it is you just get more elastic recoil, so that that generates some power on its own. B, any force coming from that elastic recoil of the Achilles tendon isn't force that needs to be generated by active muscular contraction, so it's more energy efficient. But two, and this is like maybe the more important, like that's why it's good for like sprinting or jumping. And in theory, that's beneficial for any length of distance running, but like kind of the faster and more explosive something is, the more beneficial the length of the tendon is, like for that reason. But for distance runners, the reason you want that long tendon is it just means you have like less mass further from the joint. So like, again, just thinking about this conceptually, if you just hold your arm like straight out in front of you and like put a weight on your elbow, doesn't feel that heavy, doesn't take that much energy to hold it up. You put it on your wrist, it takes more energy to hold it up. It's a little bit harder. And that's kind of the same concept. Like if that's why runners are so obsessive about having the lightest shoes possible. Like if you have 1 ounce of additional mass near the midpoint of your body, that's not going to have hardly any effect at all on like the energy cost of running.
2 hours.
Yeah, but if you have more weight at the very, very bottom of your leg, that like multiplies the energy cost of like moving it. So if you have the same amount of calf muscle, but it's really close to the back of your knee, that is more energetically efficient to like bend your knees and just stride and keep moving for kilometers and kilometers than if you have the same total amount of calf mass, but more of that mass is down closer to your ankle.
Dude, you just empowered me. You just empowered me with the biggest fucking excuse for why I'm a slow man. My calves
you got big calves?
So fat and so distally developed. Oh my God. Like,
hell yeah, brother.
It's my only big muscle. I think it's why I get a lot of online hate, because not only am I a skinny, opinionated cunt who talks about building muscle and getting strong a lot, but a lot of big, strong people, the one thing that's letting down their physique is they just got baby calves. I have Asian dad calves.
Yeah. No, I'm
right that polarity. I'm the opposite. I'm the runner here.
He can dunk. Can you still dunk?
No, not any. I haven't been able to dunk in. I don't even measure it in time. I measure it in pounds of body weight. I haven't been able to dunk in at least 80 pounds.
Okay.
Yeah. And a decade plus. Like it. Yeah.
We got to get the adjustable rim, dude. I know you could have the time for it if you wanted. I know you're a busy guy and you work very hard, but I know you could have time if you cared about it to get the adjustable rim in your driveway and return to dunking, Greg.
I would like to. That would be fun, but I would definitely need to lose a decent bit of weight to pull that off.
Ozempic and a low rim.
I mean, low rim fixes everything. Like, give me a 6 foot rim, and I'm Tracy McGrady. I'm Vince Carter. I'm going to put my whole elbow in it. But 10-foot rim, that's a different thing.
The GPP group program is the best deal in strength and conditioning. For less than $1 a day, you get access to my programming, as well as access to me through a group chat where you can reach out, ask questions, or have a form check. You can even get a week for free before you commit to it. Check out the show notes for more info. Can we just quickly, do you have many thoughts on, with the GLP-1 drugs, or Ozempic is the one I know. I think there's a few others. Do you have many strong opinions on that? Like, not even for like obesity, but more for the performance side of things and like bodybuilders taking them. Do you think, because what I hear is the problems that they're causing, like the side effects when people are like, Ozempic, but it's people that are taking the drug and they just lose a lot of body mass. Whereas hypothetically, if you're training, you will lose mostly fat. But are there risks with these GLP-1 drugs for like competitive bodybuilders or maybe physique or weight class based athletes? Or is it not an area of interest?
I'll give the biggest disclaimer before saying anything. Not a doctor, not a pharmacist. I want to make that incredibly clear. And I've read some of this research, but I haven't done like a full like deep dive. So what I'm saying, who knows? If I ever do that deep dive, maybe 3 months from now, I would have a completely different take. This is entirely provisional, just talking shit.
Oh, we love these.
That's out of the way. I think most of the concerns about them are blown way out of proportion, honestly. I'm not aware of mechanistically anything that they would do to lead to unfavorable body composition outcomes. My understanding
is just a deficit. Ozempic butt. It's like you just had someone losing a bunch of weight, because like I've seen people get Ozempic butt from losing a lot of weight.
Lose a bunch of weight very fast. Yeah. So the thing about those drugs is they work really, really well. Like they kill your appetite. People tend to lose a lot of weight very quickly, and there's not an enormous amount of research you can compare them to. So there is some research on like medically supervised very low calorie diets, where before the introduction of these drugs, there were studies where they would put people on like 800 calorie per day diets. And
while McDonald's rapid fat loss.
And in free living conditions, people tend to just not stick to them. Like, they generally reduce calorie intake, but they don't actually stick to like super low intakes for a long time. But like in the instances where it's like medically supervised and people are actually sticking to diets that extreme, and again, not for a period of years, but for a period of like 3 to 6 months, the outcomes you see are very similar to what you see with the GLP-1 drugs in terms of like the kind of ratio of fat to lean mass lost. And the other somewhat applicable body of research would be like gastric bypass surgery, where and gastric bypass surgery works on basically the same principle. Instead of like taking a drug to make you feel fuller faster and therefore kill your appetite, you just make the stomach smaller so that you eat a little bit, you get very full. It slows down gastric emptying. You have less desire to eat. Like they're different, but they have a lot of similarities. And the body comp outcomes after gastric bypass surgery are also pretty similar to GLP-1 drugs. And so, yeah, like I don't think there's anything necessarily about GLP-1 or now with like the combination drugs, GLP-1 and GIP receptor antagonism that like directly causes muscle loss or protein degradation or anything like that. I think it's mostly just in the research you see published, it's people not lifting weights and they go from eating a lot to not very much. They lose a lot of weight very fast. And a decent bit of that is going to be lean mass. I'm not aware of any mechanistic reason to suspect that if someone just used those drugs to kind of like kill their appetite, but they still like hit their macros like a robot, that the outcomes they saw from that would be meaningfully different than they would be otherwise, assuming, and again, not medical advice, not a doctor, not a pharmacist. Don't do anything with what I'm about to say. I do think that it probably would depend on like dosage a little bit. Like I think if and
is there much variance in that, in what they're testing on people at the moment? It's like, oh, you're real big, so you take a lot of it. Is that?
Yeah. So like all of the drugs on the market do have dose response studies on them. They don't stratify like, hey, we're going to give the biggest people the highest dose and like the smallest people the lowest dose. It is just like randomized control trial. So you have a pool of subjects, you give some of them a lot, some of them a little less, some of them a little less on down. And yeah, like the more of them you take, typically the more weight you lose. But so like the way that they work is both like antagonizing those receptors does like decrease perceptions of hunger, but B, it does also delay gastric emptying. So one place where I think you might run into trouble is like, let's say someone's like a really big bodybuilder and they're trying to get fucking shredded for a show, but like their calorie intake, you know, to get to 120 kilos at 4% body fat is still like 2,500 calories a day or something like that. You know, like they're not actually trying to diet on like 1,000 calories a day. They're just like taking these drugs to make 2,500 calories a day be associated with, you know, no hunger response whatsoever. If they took more than they needed to, I could see that leading to delays in gastric emptying that would, that would potentially be problematic. Because
protein's pretty satiating. Like I imagine, pounding 300 grams of protein on Ozempic probably not.
No, I mean, like not even that. Like if you eat those 300 grams of protein before your body can do anything with them, they need to leave your stomach and enter the small intestine and then from there be absorbed. I'm saying if you were taking okay, let's just say that if you're taking 15 milligrams of Ozempic per week, the total amount of food that your body will actually like release from your stomach is like 1,500 calories a day or something like that. If you still needed to consume 2,500 calories a day for your diet, but your stomach is just not releasing that many into your small intestine, that could cause kind of like, I mean, some sort of fucking backup, maybe leading to like, maybe leading to like gallstones, maybe leading to like heartburn, like, you know, whatever. But so yeah, like I do, now that I think about it more, I could still see there being like mechanistic risks of like taking high doses when what you're really trying to accomplish would only require a fairly low dose. But yeah, if someone is just using like 2.5 milligrams because they're like, I need to get shredded anyways, and this just takes the edge off the hunger, I would be surprised if that led to like significant deleterious physique outcomes, but who knows? It's also one of those things where like the bodybuilding population is not who has been studied as far as these drugs go. You know, like we know the effects when obese people take them, or previously when diabetic people take them. Like we know what that looks like. We don't know what it looks like when it's someone who's already pretty lean and they're 125 kilos and exercising a ton and also blasting gear and using a bunch of peptides. Like, are there interactions there? I don't fucking know. So yeah, with the very limited amount that we collectively know, and the even more limited amount that I know about these drugs, I'd be surprised if a low dose was that problematic. But I'm not confident in that because there are still just a ton of question marks. But the thing I would be the most concerned about is like if you're still eating enough and you're taking a high enough dose of GLP-1 drugs that like rate of gastric emptying did actually become like a constraint on digestion.
I love how with any area of public research on like public health issues like obesity, you always have bodybuilders kind of like peering over the fence to be like, "Ooh, can we take advantage of this?" It's like, guys, we're trying to save obese people here. Just stop trying to get shredded.
Or like fucking like SARMs back in the day. Are people still using SARMs? I feel like I don't hear people talking about SARMs anymore.
SARMs fell off. I feel like SARMs fell off.
I think it's peptides are pretty popular now in the TikTok community of fitness right now. A lot of
I got offered free peptides the other day.
Interesting. What were you offered?
So ones that I've actually flirted with BPC 157. Do you have thoughts?
The healing one, yeah.
I've heard some fucking awesome things.
Yeah. Me too.
Back down to earth, or
I've never used it. I'm not aware of like much of any research on it, but I've never heard a negative anecdote about it.
Yeah, neither.
They call it the Wolverine drug. I'm like,
everyone I know who's used it only has good things to say about it.
Does that strip your natty card though, Gus?
I'm sure it does.
I'd incinerate my natty card to fucking heal a fucking blasted Achilles tendon in 2 weeks. Like,
yeah, 100%. Oh,
but I've had that thought. If I get my fucking my goal, Greg, I'm trying to run a sub 1200 meters, and it's like if I piss hot to run a sub 12, I'll probably have to kill myself.
Oh man!
But if it was BPC 157, they'd be like, "Look, he was just trying to stay in the game."
Well, they're not even going to test for that. I'm sure.
No. Okay. Oh my god, I'm free.
Are they testing for that now?
I would assume that they can't. That was going to be another. So we could be sweet.
Yeah, I mean,
Gus is on natty.
It's not your fault. Don't worry, Greg. They won't blame you.
No, you would be fine. Like you could keep going. Not trying to like talk shit or start too much drama or anything, but like, you know, like that happened with Greg Doucette back in the day in 2 separate sports. Like he pissed hot in
BP6 or something else.
No, just failing drug tests. But he pissed hot in. He pissed hot and tested powerlifting, and then he moved to like competitive master cycling and pissed hot in that as well. Or just like skipped. Yeah, and like it happened, and like no one cares. So yeah, if you got busted doing peptides to run a sub 1200 meters, like people might make jokes at your expense for like 6 months, and then everyone's gonna forget about it. And if anyone brings it back up, they'll be like, "Lol, that rocks. That's hilarious."
I'll just go to cycling, and people are like, "Oh, now I get the vision. He just wanted a arena to cheat in."
We absolutely love doing this show, and one of the most exciting things for us is watching it grow, because it means we can commit more time to it, as well as have access to better guests to bring you even more quality content. One of the most impactful ways you can help us grow the show is by shouting it out, screenshotting this episode, and sharing it on your stories to let people know that you're listening. Don't underestimate how influential you can be on helping us grow this show, and we appreciate it so much.
But I mean, with peptide stuff, like I mean, what I know about fucking anything is just kind of like what's published and what I've heard anecdotes about. And at least with steroids, like there's research. With a lot of these peptides, it is just like,
is it just rats?
Some of it's rats. Some of it is purely just like in vitro stuff that people are taking speculative mechanisms away from. With SARMs, that is a little bit different. Like talking about obesity drugs and bodybuilders kind of like peeking over the wall to see, what's going on there. It was similar with SARMs. Like they were developed for people with like muscle wasting conditions.
Okay.
Yeah. So the thing about the thing about androgens is like, help you build more muscle, help you preserve muscle mass, whatever. But they also tend to have deleterious effects on the immune system. Like you're slightly more susceptible to contracting communicable diseases. And so like researchers were trying to cook up drugs that would have androgen-like effect on muscles without having all of the systemic effects, partially for the immune stuff, partially just because like, a 70-year-old female cancer patient doesn't want to have to start shaving her face for the first time in her life. Like there's undesirable side effects that people were trying to avoid. And so they started seeing like, hey, is there a way that we can selectively modulate the androgen receptor primarily in muscle, or maybe muscle and bone, and hopefully not in other tissues that aren't of like mesenchymal origin. Like they made some progress on it, but bodybuilders were just kind of like peeking over the wall, like, what's going on over there? And they ended up taking way higher doses than anyone ever intended, and then found out like, you take too much Ostarine, you might go blind. So
that's so
is that? Holy shit. Gosh.
Yeah, when you take 47 times more than was ever intended for the cancer patients that it was developed for, other stuff might start happening. You never know. So
bodybuilders are pound for pound the funniest fitness community. Like just as that whole thing, I love it. They're the best.
I think weightlifters give them a run for their money. Like
Olympic weightlifters.
Oh yeah. And this could just be from amount of exposure I've had to them, because like after he got me into powerlifting, Travis got into weightlifting. The gym became like mostly a weightlifting gym for a bit. So spent a lot of time with weightlifters, went to like some weightlifting seminars and whatnot. And weightlifters are hilarious because no one hates weightlifting more than weightlifters do. Because like the thing about powerlifting or like other strength sports is like when you have a bad day, you still get something done. Like you go into the gym, you think like, I'd really like to get some reps with 250 on the squat today. Yeah. Like you really want to get a set of 5 with 250, but like you're warming up and like 200 is moving like shit. And so you're like, I'll just drop back, get some reps in, whatever. Weightlifting, you have a bad day, fucking terrible. Like you just can't get a lift in. And then, like when you have the worst possible day in powerlifting, you say like, I'll do some, I don't know, like curls or knee extensions or lunges or whatever. In weightlifting, everything is like shifted down a little bit. It's like, I can't complete a snatch. I can't get a clean and jerk in. I guess I'll do some squats. Like that is kind of like, the things that are our most despair lifts are kind of like their, you get the point. And like the better and better you get, and like the more highly refined things get, it seemed like the more and more likely you were to have a bad day rather than a good day. But I also think like the vibe I got was sort of like you get from gamblers, where it's like, okay, look, like I'm going to lose a lot. Most of the time I'm going to lose, but sometimes I'm going to win. And that's also different from powerlifting, because like occasionally you'll have a good day and hit a big PR, but like most of the time your training's pretty decent. Like you have some good days, you have some bad days, but most of the time it's pretty all right. And like when you do hit a PR, you were kind of like building up to it. You see it coming. With weightlifting, it often seems like PRs just come totally out of the blue.
And then you got to hit it on the platform somehow. And you're this took me 9 shots.
Well, but also like you don't PR on anything for like 9 months. And then out of nowhere, you hit like a 5 kilo PR on snatch. And you're like, holy, it feels like hitting the lotto. And so like they were getting so fucking depressed. And then huge shot at like the from observing them, it seemed like the dopaminergic effect that they experience from PRing is dramatically different from anything I've ever experienced. So like higher highs, lower lows. And they're a fun bunch of people to be around, I think.
My mate, one of my clients actually summarized it quite well when he was sort of referencing golf. He was like a big business guy, ran a tracking company. He was like, I hate when you see someone dominating their golf game and you're having a shit day. It's double tough because, not only is their golf game on, but every other part of their personal life must be in order as well, because you need a clear mind to golf well. And the snatch is the same. If you see someone snatching well, you're like, fuck, that person's whole life is just sorted. Like there's nothing in the back of their head.
They just got such a good night of sleep. God damn it. Yeah. No, for sure. I think every community of strength athletes is like insane in their own way. They're all fun. Except for strongmen. Strongmen tend to be just fucking normal, but strong as shit. Like they're
the most unnormal sport too. Yeah.
They're the tallest as well. So probably the most personally secure.
That's probably it now that I think about it. Yeah.
True. I had a question around, so being the Gen Z aspect of this podcast, I'm on TikTok quite a bit. And the new meta right now that's being talked about is how bulking is dead and main gaining is now the new thing. So I think the rationale behind it is the proteins that you make require you to eat more calories rather than the other way around. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on ideas like that.
One, I think people are just coming up with shit by redefining terms in a way that's kind of head scratching. So yeah, the energetic cost of synthesizing proteins is not a component. I got frustrated with people for misunderstanding terms one way, and now I think they're just misunderstanding them in a completely opposite way. But yeah, so
of hell.
Okay, so back in my day, the type of error that people would make is saying like, oh, hey, I was eating 2,000 calories, I was maintaining my weight, and now I started like lifting really hard. I'm like building a little muscle, scale's not changing that much, but I'm eating like 2,500 calories now. So like I'm in a 2,500 calorie surplus. And like, you're not, you're roughly at maintenance still. Like maybe you're in a small surplus, but you increased your calorie intake by 500 calories, but it doesn't really seem like you're storing that much additional energy in your body. Therefore, like you're not actually at a surplus of that magnitude. The direction people seem to be going with it now is kind of like getting that part of it, but then acting like the energy that is stored in the additional muscle tissue you build isn't representative of a net energy surplus, which is also just patently untrue. Like in the simplest terms possible, you kind of know if you are in a surplus or deficit or at maintenance on the back end, where all like a net surplus or deficit represent is a change in the total amount of stored metabolizable chemical energy in your body over time. So if you previously had 10 kilograms of fat on your body and now you have 12 kilograms of fat on your body, those additional 2 kilograms are storing metabolizable chemical energy. Therefore, assuming you don't have any change in total lean mass, you were in a net energy surplus. The same is true when it comes to building muscle. Like if you don't gain or lose any fat, but you gain 5 kilograms of muscle mass, there is net metabolizable energy stored in the proteins in those muscles, where if you went in an energy deficit, your body would metabolize some of those proteins and derive energy from them. Like if it is energy that can be accessed and utilized if you were in an energy deficit, or just even if you're just doing fucking normal protein turnover, like you're going to liberate amino acids, like you're going to replace a lot of them if you're not actually losing muscle. But yeah, if those amino acids there are something you could break down and metabolize, if you are storing more than you used to, that is representative of, at least within that body compartment, a net energy surplus having taken place. Which I will say, I do think the current misunderstanding is closer to the truth than the prior misunderstanding.
So we've gotten somewhere somewhat, yeah.
We're like a straw manning of the dreamer bulk. Like I feel like the dreamer bulk is a meme of decades gone past, and I don't think anyone has ever recommended that you blow out and just put on ridiculous amounts of body fat to create anabolism and to build more muscle. Like people have been saying lean bulk for years, and I think because now what do they say? It's maintenance plus, and I'm like, fuck, like you can't be pulling shit in an industry full of idiots like that. You need to be very clear.
Just a small surplus. Yeah. No, for sure. And I mean, I'll be honest, the thing about that, and honestly the thing with like a lot of like TikTok fitness information that frustrates me the most is less what people are saying and more just the lack of epistemic humility with which they are saying it.
It's all very like finger wavy, like idiot.
Well, and it's all very like, I'm sure of this. For a lot of stuff, we're like, there's really no good reason for people to be like sure about just about anything. So I think bulking is a really good topic that like encapsulates this. There are one or two may not immediately be coming to mind, but I think there are 4 or maybe 5 longitudinal bulking studies in humans. Like,
oh wow!
It's a topic that people have always talked very confidently about with absolutely no good reason.
I didn't know it was like that. Wow.
Yeah, like there's very, and by that I mean studies where people are on a structured training program and you have at least 2 groups who are like prescribed different like diets that are intended to lead to different sizes of surpluses. There was an old study by Rozenek in 2002. There was a study by Garth in 2013, I believe. And that was it for a long, long time. And then there was a paper by Smith in like 2018 or so. And there was a paper by Helms just published like last year or the year before, where they tried to put people in different size surpluses, but everyone actually ended up being in basically the same surplus. And so instead of like analyzing really differences in groups,
part of it, people aren't in their groups adherent to their protocol. It's fucking hard.
Yeah,
Bulking's hard.
it's difficult. Yeah, and especially if you're trying to target like small surpluses. Yeah, like that was the thing with the Helm study. They tried to compare maintenance versus like a 5% surplus versus like a 15% surplus, and like total weight gain in all three groups ended up being very similar. And they're like, shit, never mind. Like these groups didn't actually end up being that different. So let's just compare differences in body comp outcome using regression analysis. Like regardless of group assignment, some people ended up gaining more, some people ended up gaining less. Is the total weight gain that they achieved, and therefore the degree of surplus they were in, is that predictive of training outcomes?
Were they regulating activity levels as well, I'd imagine?
There was there was an assigned training program, but I mean, outside of those hours, people
count too, surely. Like,
people are just going to do what they're going to do.
Yeah. Some guys running marathons.
It's like there's not a tremendous amount of research on bulking in the first place. And when you look at it kind of like study by study, the Rozenek paper was very bullish on the concept of bulking, but it used untrained subjects. And the experimental manipulation used in that study is they had one control group where they just had them lift, but there was no dietary manipulation. And then there was one group that they gave a protein and carbohydrate supplement, and one group that they gave just a carbohydrate supplement. And the two supplement groups, I forget for sure. They were it was either a 1,000 or 2,000 calorie supplement, like a big mass gainer shake.
Just to push them over the line, sort of thing.
I think it was 2,000 calories. But yeah, it was just a big old mass gainer shake, basically. And in that study, by the current TikTok definitions, none of them were in a surplus. In the real world, the control group probably was actually like in a small net energy deficit. They ended up gaining like 1.4 kilos of lean mass and lost like 0.8 kilos of fat. And since the energy, and you know, that's not crazy for like untrained people lifting for the first time. Yeah. Like you put on 2-3 pounds of muscle, maybe lose a pound or two of fat. Like, that's pretty normal. And then the two groups given that like high calorie supplement, both of them gain like 3 kilos of fat-free mass and basically no body fat. So under current TikTok definitions, you'd say, they were both at maintenance and also gained 3 kilos of fat-free mass. And anyone else would just say, they were in a small surplus. And we know that because it didn't really seem like they lost body fat, but they also gained 3 kilos of fat-free mass.
What's a lie we could make to now bring bulking back?
Well,
in an exaggerated way. I'm like, we need a grift.
All originated from Paul Carter. Just wanted to. So I don't think it was fully
Paul Carter's fault for this one.
Yeah, Paul Carter.
I will happily blame Paul Carter for a lot of this industry's problems.
No, this is definitely Paul Carter.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Yeah. He started this one.
Dribbled to TikTok. Yeah.
Fuck. I don't. Okay. Here's an old man yells at clouds rant that I have. The person who I've seen most associated with it is not Paul Carter, but it's someone with some fucking screen name. I don't know their real name, and people just have handles now, and people are referring to each other as like.
I don't like that either, man.
Just random nouns.
Yeah,
just I had random abbreviations, random acronyms. Yeah.
Sick of dealing with people with superhero names. I was so fucking sick of just having run-ins with other big accounts. I'm like, what the fuck is your actual name?
Yeah.
But they're all older than. These people weren't fucking kids. These like 40-year-old dudes. Anyway,
drives me crazy. Yeah, but back in my day, people went by their names, and that's enough.
Nuckols et al. Or get fucked.
Yeah, or just Greg. You know, I have two names. You can use either of them. It's fine. I forget what I was saying. Oh yeah. So Rozenek, big increase in calorie intake. most of it just seemed to be channeled to gaining lean mass. Like, and so it's hard to use that as like pro or con, how people tend to be using the term bulking these days to just be like weight gain with fat gain. Cause like, they gain quite a bit of weight, but actually not all that much fat. So it's hard to know if they ate even more such that they also gained fat, would they have gained more muscle as a result? And then you had Garth, which is Garth and Helms are the only two studies that have actually been done in like pretty well trained athletes. So Garth back in the day did 2 studies on like Olympic team athletes from Norway. Like they were like a sports scientist or dietitian or something associated with the Norwegian national teams. And one of them is like one of the classic cutting papers, like the classic paper that compared 1.4 to 0.7% of body weight per week weight loss for cutting. They did a study on bulking as well, where they had people basically just like trying to gain weight of their own volition and trying to gain weight with the advice of a dietitian. And the advice of the dietitian was basically just to like eat way more than the people did when left to their own devices.
Mostly motivation.
Yeah. And so you did wind up with 2 different actual rates of weight gain in that study. And the results were like kind of a Rorschach test where like there weren't statistically significant differences in gains in lean body mass or performance between groups, but gains in lower body lean mass were like maybe slightly greater in the group that gained more weight and more body fat. But it was like, I think it was like 1.1 versus like 0.7 kilograms or something like that, which like, maybe it's differences in muscle mass. It could just be like differences in glycogen or, water retention or whatever. Who knows?
There's so much fucking noise with the measuring.
Oh, so for sure. Yeah.
So much shit.
Just quickly, I hate to interrupt the tangent you're on, but you're brushing up against something else that's quite relevant. I'm just conscious of the clock run, or I have respect for your time. Edema studies, high volume. It's just edema.
I fully understand when I go on a podcast that's scheduled for 1 hour, it's not going to be an hour. I'm a blabber, and I know that about myself.
It's so good for podcasts though, because that's all I want. Yeah. I just want to ask a question and then for someone to go and you smash that.
So let me just wrap up on bulking first. Basically, you have like a pair of studies in pretty untrained individuals. You have Rozenek, you have the other study I alluded to by Smith. Won't talk about that one in as much detail, but it also generally tended to suggest that gaining more weight resulted in larger total gains in lean mass and also gains in fat. So it was generally pro bulking, I guess. Maybe like you could read it that way. But it's also kind of a Rorschach test, sort of like the Garth study. And then the Helms paper, where they ended up having to look at differences in results using regression analysis. And if memory serves, in that study, they looked at several like direct measures of hypertrophy. That's another thing to note. All of the bulking studies, except for the Helms study, only looked at changes in fat-free mass, which could just be influenced by residual food content in the gut or fluid retention or glycogen or whatever.
So no lean mass.
No. Like they only looked at lean mass and not like direct measures of like muscle thickness or cross-sectional area.
No, it's like organs and just everything. If you say tummy contents is in that, of course it is. Yeah. What other categories it in? If
memory serves, I think the Helms paper is the only one that actually took like direct measures of muscle size. And I think it looked at bicep thickness and quad thickness. And I think bicep thickness was like significantly associated with weight gain, but like it was kind of like barely significant. It wasn't like a very, very strong correlation. And there was like no correlation with quads, if memory serves. So like, yeah, we at best have a small body of research that people could read multiple different ways. Like if you wanted to look at that and say, hey, we have indications from Garth. We saw larger gains in lean mass with larger surpluses. They gained some fat, but like gains in leg lean mass was greater as well. Smith also generally suggested that like, hey, the people gaining more weight gained more muscle, or gained more lean mass, but also fat. You look at Rosnick, they didn't actually gain any fat, but like these untrained people, they ate way, way more and just gained more muscle as a result. Or you could look at it and say, hey, we only have one study that directly assessed muscle size. And of the two muscles it looked at, you had one where gains were like barely associated with gains in body weight, and another where gains weren't associated with gains in body weight. And in the other three studies, like differences tended to be fairly small, and like who the fuck knows? It could like it wasn't direct measures of muscle size. It could just be, intestinal contents, glycogen, whatever. So we don't have a large body of research to go off of for like anyone to be super confident in any recommendations.
There is some certainty in the recommendations. Let me tell you,
based on what we have, like it is entirely within the realm of possibility as the research stands right now that muscle gains could be maximized at roughly energetic maintenance, like just the bare minimum surplus necessary to accrue muscle protein, like an incredibly small surplus, or it could be maximized with a huge surplus. Like those are both, the research does not preclude either of those options. And anyone who's like very positive that either a dreamer bulk is necessary or completely unnecessary doesn't know how to read research. Like it's wild to me. Edema. Yeah, that's also dumb as shit, honestly. And so, okay. So
yeah, nice.
For the listener, I guess there's been a growing trend, which honestly, I'll just come out and say it. I think it's it seems deployed. This seems to be something that's deployed only in situations that are convenient. I think it is a method of reading studies to ensure that you only come away with the interpretation that you would like to. I don't think it's actually being deployed in good faith. But and I'll explain why in a second. But something that you'll frequently see is when a study on basically like more challenging training, whether that be higher training volume or training at longer muscle lengths or training with eccentrics or anything that like is generally more challenging, might cause more muscle damage. Anytime a study is done, like a longitudinal training intervention, and it is observed that training manipulation leads to larger gains in direct measures of muscle size, whether that be muscle thicknesses, cross-sectional area, fiber cross-sectional area, what have you. People will say, oh, well, nah, we can't take that seriously because the post-training assessments of muscle size were, in most of these studies, typically performed 48 to 72 hours after the last training bout. And at that time, there's still a tremendous amount of muscle swelling. And so when you train with higher volumes, that's going to cause more damage. That's going to cause more swelling. And so that is, you think you're observing more muscle growth when training at higher volumes, but actually all of these studies are just confounded by swelling that's occurring that is still present 48 to 72 hours after the last training session. Or you think eccentrics are causing more hypertrophy, but it's actually just because there's still residual swelling present. Or you think training with longer muscle lengths is causing more hypertrophy, but it's actually just confounded by residual swelling that's still present. So that's something you'll commonly see deployed. The evidence that people will cite to support that contention in almost all cases, and like this is very critical, comes from studies where they only assess a single exercise bout, and typically in untrained subjects. And so I shouldn't need to tell you guys, but if you take someone who's untrained, put them through any sort of challenging training intervention, guess what? They're going to be fucking sore the next day. They're going to experience a lot of muscle damage. They're going to experience a lot of muscle swelling. But then what if you have them do it again? Like they do the same workout a second time. Do they get as sore? Do they experience as much muscle damage? Do they experience as much swelling? No. And then crazy idea. What if you had them do it a third time? You know, like what if you actually had them do it 30 times? What if they did the same what if they were exposed to the same stressor, the same stimulus 3 times a week for 12 weeks? Do you think that they're still experiencing as much post-exercise swelling fucking 3 months later as they were the first time they were exposed to this stressor? No, absolutely not. And I'm not just talking shit and saying that. Like, there's research on this. Like, so most of the research that does assess post-exercise swelling does only have a single exercise bout. Of the minority that have, and the majority of the ones that have multiple bouts, there was like a line of research back in like the 80s and 90s that was essentially looking at like how durable the repeated bout effect was. Like there was this big research question that like multiple different lab groups were just kind of like nibbling around the edges at, where it's basically like, hey, we observe that if you do like a workout, like something that causes muscle damage, and then you do it again a week later, you experience less muscle damage. But like, how long does that stick around? Does it stick around for a month? And like, so there's close to a dozen papers where they'll put people through like an eccentric training protocol and then put them through the same protocol 4 weeks later. And like some of them observe attenuations of damage still present 4 weeks later. Some of them don't. And so it just kind of like went back and forth where people were just like, does this stick around for a month? Yeah. But like, you know, most of the time, if we do a workout, we're not going to wait a month to work out again. It's usually like later that week or the next week. So there's
handy that they got so interested in it back then. It's sort of set us up with some good data for this.
Well, for this in particular, not so much. Because there is unfortunately a smaller body of research where you do take people and have them do a workout and then the same workout the next week or like 2 weeks later. Like that 4 week time course between is annoying because that isn't how most people train. But in the studies that we do have where like it looks more like the way people would typically train. Like you do a workout and then you do the same workout the next week, or like later in the same week. You see a massive attenuation in muscle swelling just from the first bout to the second. And then, man, for my money, the best paper on this topic is unfortunately one of the few, or like one of the ones that like didn't assess swelling. Like it looked at every other marker of post-exercise fatigue and muscle damage, but didn't directly assess swelling. Like I'll note that up top. But like most of the studies that do assess like progressive attenuations in swelling after repeated bouts to the same stimulus do just have like 2 bouts. So then the question is like, do you see further attenuations after that? And the best paper on the topic was just looking at like fatigue and other markers of damage, was a paper, I think from 2021 by Margaritelis and colleagues, like a Greek group, where they compared eccentric only training to concentric only training over a period of 10 weeks. And just as background for listeners, I'm sure you guys know this, but like eccentric training causes way more muscle damage than concentric training does. And that showed up in the data. So it was a 10-week training intervention. Subjects either did, it was five sets of 15 maximal reps, like on a dynamometer, either all concentric or all eccentric. And like, have you guys ever done any like maximal eccentric training? Not just like messed around with like heavy overloads in your training, but like actually gotten on a dynamometer and had had it fuck you up.
No, but even flirting with like just something that could be considered eccentric overload, I can't imagine how brutal maximal eccentric like tolerable overload would be.
Dog, it's crazy. When I was in grad school, one of the other master's students in the cohort ahead of me was like the research topic doesn't matter. They were looking at like whether some intervention could mitigate post-exercise muscle damage, but the protocol itself was like a maximal eccentric protocol, and I was one of the guinea pigs that they used to kind of like test. Like from the literature, they knew that the protocol was like, it worked, it was valid, it was going to really fuck people up. But you know, like master students want to actually check to make sure they can use the dynamometer, like take people through the protocol, whatever. So I was one of the guinea pigs, and brother, I have never, like my quads have never been as sore in my entire life. And it was a unilateral protocol as well. So like,
so just blowing up one leg. I got to do it twice.
Was it that leg extension that goes like when you're strapped in? Yeah.
So basically, like the machine is stronger than you. There is no John Henry in this situation. No one will ever beat the machine. Like the machine, you cannot stop it from flexing your knee, but you have to resist. Shit. You have to resist it with every ounce of ability you have. And yeah, dog.
And
like
I train. Like we know you can train.
Yeah, like
imagine if you got a bunch of other people in there, they would have pussied out. But
yeah, and I was giving it my all. And dude, you know how like if you get like two people in a rowboat and only one of them's rowing, the boat's just gonna spin around in circles. That's how I felt like I was walking for like a week after that. Like my left leg was fine. My right leg felt like it was gonna give out anytime I put weight on it. Like I was straight up hobbling, dude. It was brutal. And so studying untrained subjects. And so whatever they're going through was worse than what I was going through. So yeah, like maximal concentrics causes some fatigue, some muscle damage. 5 sets of 15 maximal eccentrics in that population is going to cripple them in the first week. And it was 10 weeks of training, 1 session per week. And they looked at like initial reductions in and then recovery of isometric, eccentric, and concentric strength after each workout. They looked at attenuations in, what was the inflammation marker? I think IL-6, either IL-6 or C-reactive protein, one of the two. And they looked at either creatine kinase or myoglobin or both, like a marker of like muscle membrane permeability and muscle damage. And what you saw was like week 1, and they took all of these measurements for, if memory serves, up to 4 days after each session, every week for 10 weeks. So you could see whether all of those like post-exercise damage responses progressively attenuated or whether they would kind of like hit a wall and you would wind up with sort of like a steady state difference between eccentrics and concentrics. And yeah, like first week, the subjects doing only eccentrics were fucked up. Like something like 30% reductions in maximum strength 24 hours after the first training session. Huge increases in IL-6, huge increases in, I think, creatine kinase, just like every indication that like they were mangled. And then by about week 5, there weren't particularly large differences between eccentrics and concentrics anymore in terms of like any markers of post-exercise fatigue, muscle damage, inflammation. And by week 10, there were no differences between eccentrics and concentrics. And there was also just like no main effect of time. Like there was no indication that the eccentric only training was causing any muscle damage anymore. Like there were no elevations in blood biomarkers of damage. There were no elevations in blood biomarkers of inflammation.
So we do adapt to it quite quickly.
Yeah, like there were no reductions in isometric force, no reductions in eccentric, no reductions in concentric. Like people, this protocol that 10 weeks prior had ruined people. After 10 exposures to the protocol once a week, they were fine. Like there was no indication that they were getting fucked up. And it was like a progressive thing where like the largest adaptations were observed in the first 3 or 4 weeks, but then there were like ongoing progressive attenuations from there. And so like, yeah, if you're going to argue that there's still a ton of swelling present 48 to 72 hours after a training session, like that's the kind of stuff you need to contend with. Like it's not sufficient to just cite a paper looking at swelling when untrained lifters do a high volume of damaging workout a high volume of damaging exercise for the first time. Like, of course there's going to be swelling present at 48 to 72 hours later. But yeah, in studies that take like multiple measurements after repeated exposures, we see a huge attenuation from just the first to the second session, and then progressive attenuations from there, to the point where like I'm not going to sit here and say like I am positive that there is absolutely zero post-exercise swelling when people have been doing the same training program for 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever. But I do feel incredibly confident saying, to whatever extent it occurs, it's dramatically less than what would be suggested from the studies that people cite to support that point. And also, if it occurs, I'm also very open to the idea that like if you train a muscle with like any to any degree that would be like somewhat challenging for just like a day or two afterwards, it is just like a little bit pumped, you know, like I'm not even sure that there would be that much of a difference between like higher and lower volume training. If there is still
the amount that it's going to produce.
If there is still some elevation present 48 hours post, like if there is a difference, I'd be surprised if there was much of a difference at all. And if one exists, I would expect it to be like actually pretty minuscule. And yeah, because like, yeah, damage and swelling responses attenuate with repeated exposures. And in these studies that are longitudinally assessing hypertrophy, you have people who are on the same training program for typically 8 to 12 weeks. Like that is plenty of time. You're not going to be that
inflamed. Like,
yeah,
it's just,
and I feel like if people would think about it for half a second, like anyone with much training experience should know that. Like you should be able to think about that for 2 seconds and be like, wait, no, if I do the same training program for 2 or 3 months, even a hard one, I don't feel like I'm getting that fucked up after each workout. Like,
yeah,
you should be able to.
Like, it's so tough when you're hearing them speak with confidence, though. You start to doubt what you know, and it is crazy how much tone affects the brain.
Yeah,
conviction.
No,
big lesson.
Like for sure. Like I do think that I think that people who try to scale the confidence of their claims with the strength of the evidence supporting them are at an inherent disadvantage because, I mean, like, I think almost everything I've disagreed with in this episode so far, I'm just like, here's why the people think that. And like, I disagree with them, but ultimately the research supporting my position isn't particularly strong. The research supporting their position isn't particularly strong either. And yeah, you know, and if they hear this and disagree, they'll be like, "Oh, this guy's completely full of shit, and I'm sure of it." For these like bullet points, you know, like
someone say something really aggressive about Greg, make some short form content so we can tee up a debate.
One of those is just a better. One of those is a more persuasive presentation style in a medium in which you're typically dealing with 30 to 60 second clips. Where, like the projection of confidence, I think, is like very critical for being convincing in a short form context. And I think the projection of confidence is almost always epistemically unjustifiable in most topics that would interest most lifters.
So we're cooked, and it's only going to get worse.
Yes, 100%. But before I forget this, the reason that I think the argument about swelling is always deployed in bad faith. And if I can loop this in as well, another common argument, and this kind of circles back to the start of this episode, the idea that like arguments relating to like the association between gains in strength and gains in muscle size, and like if something is causing larger gains in muscle size, it must also be causing larger gains in strength as well. And if it's not, it's only because of differences in swelling. The reason that I'm sure that's always deployed in bad faith, or if it's not, to be charitable, if it's not being deployed in bad faith, it's being deployed by people who are too stupid to think about things for half a second, is the natural implication of that is that like the optimal way to grow is just to like basically do nothing, like not train hard at all. So like as it relates to volume, the thing people will bring up is there was a meta-regression by Pelland and colleagues that, and like this is a whole other can of worms. We do not have time to go down this rabbit hole. But the kind of like surface level reading of the results is that hypertrophy increases as training volume increases up to pretty high levels of training volume. But with strength, we see increases in strength as training volume increases, but only up to about like 5 sets a week or so, and a plateau after that, where additional increases in volume don't lead to larger strength gains. And so then the argument is like, well,
that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, if you're growing more muscle, that's increasing the number of contractile proteins you have. That should be contributing to larger strength gains.
Strength, yeah.
So if we're seeing a plateau in strength gains at lower levels of volume, that means that those higher levels of volume can't be causing more muscle growth, because if it was, that would be contributing to larger gains in strength at higher volumes as well.
So they contradict each other almost.
Yeah, like that is the argument. And then the explanation that people will jump to like explain that divergence is like, oh, well, higher volumes are causing more muscle damage. It's causing more swelling. That's why it appears that people are gaining more muscle. They're just experiencing more swelling at the post-workout assessment of muscle size.
So Shaco, it's not a strength program. It's just make you more inflamed and swollen.
100%. Yeah, like that's the basic argument. But then there was also another pair of meta-regressions by Robinson and colleagues published a year prior, looking at how proximity to failure affects muscle growth and strength gains.
Was this anything 5 to 35 rep within 5 reps of failure?
No. This was different. Yeah. So it found that as you get closer to failure, if you're like equating training volume or whatever, and you're training with like a 10 rep max, if you do 4 sets of 10, you're going to gain more muscle than if you did 4 sets of 5. Basically, like the closer you train to failure, the more muscle you gain. The same meta-regression looked at the relationship between proximity to failure and strength gains and found no relationship whatsoever, like similar gains in strength at all proximities to failure. Whoa. So if you applied that same analytical framework, which no one wants to fucking do, you would say, look, when you train closer to failure, that's leading to larger gains in size, but not strength. But since if you're actually building more muscle, more contractile protein, that must be contributing to larger strength gains. Therefore, when you're training closer to failure, you're not actually building more muscle. It's actually, and training closer to failure does cause more muscle damage. Like that, there's research supporting that statement as well. So the only logical conclusion is training closer to failure is just leading to more muscle swelling at the time that hypertrophy is assessed. And we can actually maximize, like we can put these two findings together and conclude the optimal way to train for hypertrophy is you're going to do 5 sets with 10 reps in reserve. And that is perfect hypertrophy training.
And it's going to be perfectly layering on contractile tissue. You're not going to atrophy any of them.
Yeah.
Pure growth. No edema.
100%.
No strength.
And if someone isn't willing...
You don't need to go.
No, yeah, like that.
You get it. It's the best.
All you have to do to maximize strength gains. Like we know that maximizes muscle growth because it maximizes strength gains. And so if you hear that and you say, that's fucking stupid, I'm not willing to sign off on that at all. That's not how you would train to get big. Then you don't believe your fucking argument. Because like, if you're willing to apply that argument to the volume literature, literally the exact same argument applies in the exact same way to the proximity to failure literature. Like if someone wants to say, oh no, high volumes aren't necessary because it seems to cause more muscle growth, but not larger strength gains. It has to just be swelling. The same fucking thing applies to training to failure, like a rep or 2 from failure versus 10 reps from failure. Like it is the same relationship between growth and strength gains. And so if you're saying one is due to swelling, the other has to be due to swelling as well. That's the only thing that's logically consistent. And so either you don't believe that fucking argument and you're deploying it in bad faith, or you haven't thought about this at all, or you're willing to sign off on the idea that optimal hypertrophy training is 5 sets per week at 10 reps from failure. Like those are your 3 options. And these TikTok kids, they don't like that. They don't like that at all.
Too much thinking.
Wouldn't it be nice if you could just compress all that data into just 60-second vertical videos? Wouldn't it be fucking nice?
No, it wouldn't. I don't like talking in 60-second clips. Like, we're close to 2 hours. This is a short conversation for me. It takes me about 5 minutes.
Yeah. You just take time to wind up. Yeah.
It takes me 5 minutes to lay the groundwork to introduce the topic that I want to talk about. Like, I am not on TikTok. I will never be on TikTok. And if someone says, you're losing influence in the industry because of that, I say, good. That's good. That is not a style of discourse I have any interest in participating in. Like, my greatest weakness is fundamentally, this is going to be a very elitist thing to say, and whatever. I stand behind it. I mostly care that like the literate people get good results. Like
I've had this ethical conundrum. I've had this.
If
I came out the other end.
If you lack the attention span to read an article, I want you to stay small and weak. Like, there's a lot of very dumb people out there. We don't need them to get stronger. Like the dumber you are, the smaller and weaker I want you to be. Like that's I feel very comfortable with that position. Like
it's okay to just, and it's not gatekeeping isn't the right way to phrase it, but like it's a level of
it can be the right way to phrase it. I don't care. Yeah, if I'm gatekeeping content, like if the gate I'm keeping it behind is the gate, if the gate is basic literacy and the attention span to read something instead of like having the lowest common denominator shit spoon fed to you in 15-second clips, that's fine. I'll keep that fucking gate. That's fine with me.
I think that was like, that was a really good way to wrap it up. Fuck, that was enjoyable. That was very enjoyable. We'll have to get you on at some other point if you're keen to do another one podcast every couple of months. I want to talk about protein. But we can fucking get into that another day. But fuck.
Cool. Sounds good.
That was amazing. Harvey, enjoy editing that. Everyone else, I hope you enjoyed listening to that. Greg Nuckols, in the event that you do want to be located, or maybe, what are you plugging these days? Is it just Macro Factor, or that here's your opportunity?
Yeah. So I have a nutrition app. Obviously, we mostly focused on nutrition and the ins and outs of optimal macros for whatever. But yeah, no, the main thing, we have a nutrition app. It's called Macro Factor. It's sick. It adjusts your nutrition targets week to week, kind of like a nutrition coach would. Very basic concept. Most apps you download, you say, hey, I'm this old, I'm this tall, I weigh this much. And it says, you need to eat this many calories. And if it's wrong, good fucking luck. You need to figure that out for yourself or pay someone a bunch of money to figure it out for you. But ultimately that's math, and machines are good at math. And so the app does that math for you and will, adjust your targets to keep you on track for your goals. It's very good. It's sick. You should check it out. And it's called Macro Factor, and you can learn more at macrofactorapp.com, available on iOS and Android. And we've got pretty good food coverage down under. So your listeners should
apparently that's one of the biggest advantages of using Macro Factor over competitors. I've heard that you absolutely dominate that.
You stated it stronger than I would, so I'm not going to disagree. We have the best coverage in the US, but it's pretty solid in Australia. Yeah.
Nice. There you go, guys. Download the app, go get shredded or get a little bit bigger. The choice is yours. And we'll catch you next time on the High Performance Podcast.